Hey, you amazing inksters. It's your host, Kimmi Ann, for this week, and I am so excited to be sitting here today with Alexis Maness, who is the author of books Vengeance Becomes Her, Vengeance Frees Her, The Tide That Binds Us, and one of the most recently ones being a part of the Queer and Cute anthology. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
How was it being part of the Queer and Cute anthology?
It was great, honestly. I was really proud to be part of a project that was not only like uplifting queer voices and queer joy, but also helping to raise funds for an organization that supports trans rights. As a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, I was really excited to obviously provide a story that I felt represented me and other people like me. So it was a great experience, especially being part of like helping to organize that.
That's awesome. I didn't realize it was for a charity that went for trans rights. I knew that I really liked the stories because it was supposed to be like meet cutes, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was cool. But what went towards the charity part? Were book sales or anything like that included?
Yeah, so all sales are being donated. And then a portion of what the authors paid in to participate, like what we use to cover like expenses, like cover design, all that, anything left over is just being automatically donated. So
That's
I think so far we've raised a couple $1,000s.
that's amazing. Kudos to you and everyone involved. I think it said it was over 30 different authors who were
Yeah.
part of it. Did you find it easier or harder to write a shorter story compared to like your two book series or The Tide That Binds Us?
I didn't really struggle with it. I prefer writing shorter. So like I've actually been in like 3 or 4 anthologies now. So I've gotten a lot of practice with a lot of different lengths of stories. I would say I really enjoy it. Like it's fun to just kind of like get to pop into a story and like keep it really short and concise and just explore like one component of it. So I really enjoyed it. But I would say like, yeah, I'm usually like comfortable with short writing as opposed to longer writing in general.
And that brings me to another question. You talk about how you've done a lot of different stories. And I think even in your biography, it talks about how um, you're a mood author. You have
Yeah.
a preference for dark fantasy. What is it that draws you to the dark fantasy of your topics?
I think it's like just exploring kind of like the darker side of humanity and the darker side of how magic can kind of go awry. I've always really enjoyed kind of like psychology. So I think that plays into it because there's a lot of that like character development and stuff like that within the genre. And I'm also like a horror lover. So I feel like it's a good blend of those like of fantasy and horror.
Now, what would you say what horror has influenced your writing so far?
I would say honestly, one of the biggest like influence is definitely Jennifer's Body, which is like one of my favorite movies ever. I love the revenge arc and just like the characterization and how it's become like a cult classic. So that really influences pretty much a lot of the things I create are very much like that kind, not that vibe particularly, but it's definitely like just the way it was done. Just I love it so much that I think it's just influenced a lot of the ways I like create characters and like around that kind of like mentality and like women focused stories.
Now, that's a really good point. You talk about women focused stories, but it isn't just women focused, right? You really focus on creating plus size fat characters that we don't see a lot in the book world. What made you kind of decide to go that path?
Yeah, so this the main character of my duology Vengeance Comes was always going to be plus size just because like I wanted her to look somewhat like me and my friends. But then I was also a big reader and I've been reading a ton of fantasy at that point. And I was like, I'm not seeing any plus size characters. And I know there is a lot of representation in genres like sci-fi romance and regular like romantic comedies and stuff, but in fantasy there's really not much at all, and that really got under my skin and I was like, you know what, like this is what I'm going to do from now on kind of thing.
Did you face any hurdles when you started to write with plus size characters?
Yeah, I think just like there's obviously like the natural pushback of like fat phobic people in any community. Luckily, I've been very well supported. There's like a lot of people who are very excited about the representation, but there definitely are people who are like, it's not necessary or it's not realistic. That was probably the biggest hurdle. And also like as a creative, like trying to collaborate with other people and create art for the book and my cover, those were huge hurdles in getting the art right. Because if you're going to have representation, I'm a firm believer in like putting your money where your mouth is and making sure your characters are represented correctly. And that is a big problem in the book world as well.
That's interesting. I think that is an interesting point. One of the things I believe that Book Talk has done so well is allowing authors to kind of show the pitfalls and the ups and highs, lows, all of that stuff regarding publishing your own book. Do you feel like being part of Book Talk has really connected you more to the community than if like you were just off by yourself, kind of finding a writer's group?
Oh, 100%. Actually, I have started a ton of books like over my life because I've known I wanted to be an author since I was a little kid, but I never really stuck with it because there was no like support, like the community was never there. And with Book Talk, I started as a reader, but I was so inspired by how connected like the author and book community were there and how passionate readers were. And that really inspired me to actually like sit down and do it. And then I found a writers group through TikTok. So Book Talk pretty much like changed everything for me. Like I don't think I would be an author, at least like have written several things at this point if it hadn't been for like my involvement there.
Is there anything that you did when you first started off writing that you have now kind of would have done differently now that you have a few other books under your belt?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things. I think like from every aspect of the way you can look at it, like the process, I would do differently. Like for example, when I first started writing, I just kind of drafted through without like going back and reworking some things, and it made the process a lot longer than it needed to be because I just felt like I got lost, and then I wrote through the end, and then I looked back and I was like, wait, this is not the story I want to tell. So I had to go back and rewrite like the first half of it and start over. And I think now I know this doesn't work for everyone, so this is not blanket advice, but for me, like I have to work until like at the beginning right before I can go forward, or I will just spend so much extra time drafting, and that's what works for me. But like, for example, also other things like going through the publishing process, like having like admin time to get through it, or like how I approach cover designers is totally different because I feel like with authoring, yes, you can get so much advice on Book Talk and TikTok and online, and it's all great and it's very helpful. But until you make the mistakes yourself, it's really hard to like define a process for yourself. So I think like listening to like people who give advice is great, but I think like a lot of it is just like you have to learn your own process, and that's kind of like something that's almost unavoidable for anyone starting out.
Besides trying to find someone that represented the artwork that you were looking for, say, like it seemed like for Vengeance Becomes Her, were there any other hurdles that you kind of faced during your just whole journey of publication?
Yeah, I really struggled with like the editing process as a new writer. I mean, I hired people to work with, but I think just like as your first time being an author, it's really hard to like figure out that workflow, and like the timelines were very hard for me because like I said, I'm a mood writer, and working with timelines is always very difficult for me to like, and it's funny, you don't really realize how much like project management there is in being an author as a self-published author, especially because you have to like really have organizational skills. So for me, that was a very hard lesson to learn, but also, you know, I feel like there was like points where I struggled with, like I said, a lot with the writing process as a new author. But as far as like external things, you know, I know a lot of people who follow me saw that like my publishing date, like on the date that it was supposed to go live, my paperback didn't work because it wasn't formatted correctly. And like,
oh no,
Amazon was like sending me all these error codes, and like it's something that happens because they like update their requirements sometimes. But yeah, my paperback didn't launch for like another almost week because I ran into all these like technical issues.
That's crazy. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And was that with the Vengeance Becomes Her series?
Yes.
Now, when did that come out?
Last July.
Okay. And
So,
do you think you're going to want to write another series? You said earlier you do like to write on the smaller story side. So how was that writing something that had to span 2 books?
Honestly, so when I first started writing, I didn't expect it to be a series. I was like, this is a one and done. But then as I got to know the characters more, and as like I got towards the end, I was like, okay, like if I find like a reader group for this, like if I have enough reception for it, I'll write a second book and it will go this way or this way. So I started writing it then, but I kind of put it down and I was like, I need to see how things go. So when I got the reception I did and I saw like kind of what it meant to certain people, I was like, okay, well, I feel like I need to finish the story and like give it a full like life. So I didn't really realize it was going to be two books until I almost finished the first one. And then I was like, okay, like I'll commit to this if it does how I need it to perform. And really it just came down to like me wanting to like fulfill that for readers and myself and like finish this journey, because I feel like it could have ended with book one where I left it. It would have been like a major, like one of those things where it's like a stomach drop kind of moment. And like, I don't know if people would have been like completely satisfied with that, but it was a possibility. So yeah, going forward, I don't intend to write any more series. I'm not a series person. Like I said, I like to write shorter stuff. I feel like that's my strong suit. I feel like I can tell stories in a shorter span. But we'll see. I mean, I'm never going to say never. I'm working on another fantasy right now. So I don't want to put myself in a box and be like, I'm never writing one, but they're very hard. It's hard to continue for me to like stay with the same characters. Like I feel like I don't get bored necessarily, but I just feel like I need a fresh story. Like I have so many ideas that I want to work on that it was very difficult for me to like stay focused to finish the second book.
So you said you're working on a new project and it's fantasy based. We've already touched that you love horror, but a lot of your books do follow kind of that magic, mystical. The Tide That Binds Us was about mermaids. Yeah. So what is it that draws you to that towards element, that kind of fantasy worlds?
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of an escapist. Like I've been a reader since I was a little kid. I love Disney movies. Like some of my favorite shows were like Sailor Moon and like alien based shows. Just most of the shows I liked were very fantastical. And I was always in love with movies. So I think like I love being able to like create something that doesn't exist. Like I don't really find myself drawn to writing in the real world very often, just because like, you know, I want to create something new and be able to like work with fewer limits, I guess. I think it's like the ability to like really go wherever your mind takes you. And I love, like, I'm an aesthetic person. I love creating like worlds and magic because it's such like a visual thing. And that's one of my favorite parts of writing is like creating the visuals. So I think that's really what draws me to that, is just like the imagination and like the creativity and the freedom that it provides.
Now, when you're brainstorming these worlds, what's your process like? Are you creating like a vision board? Let us into that.
I'm very much a Pinterest user. Like I have multiple boards for every story. The first thing I do when I get an idea is I either sit down and make a Spotify playlist, or I make a Pinterest board, depending on wherever my brain is going at the time. Usually it's a Pinterest board, and I'll start putting together like things that remind me of like the setting, and then the characters, and like quotes that remind me of how, kind of like the vibe of it. And then from there, I'll like fill it out and like refine it into like the different characters and stuff. So I'm very much like a Pinterest person, like 100%. Like I will spend hours there trying to find like the perfect vibes to like be able to look. I usually use like a split screen too, so I can look at that and then write at the same time. Such a visual person.
That's smart. Now, with this new project you're working on, is it going to be something that you haven't done before? Because like I was very intrigued that you went from like Vengeance Becomes Her, which is almost kind of like demon, magical darkness, to that, to the mermaid side, which is like to me complete opposites.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So are you going to be touching on something new? Are you like anything like that? Give us some tidbits.
Yeah. So the new one that I'm working on is it's a sapphic dark fantasy that's more like inspired by like folk horror and like nature, and it's very like the magic, I guess, in a way that The Tide That Binds Us is like very water based. This is very much based on like the elements and like animals and stuff like that, and it's like ice magic. So it's very, I would say it's significantly darker than anything I've written before. It's very like horror influenced. So I think like it's different in that way. And I think like I've also really learned a lot about world building. So for example, the Vengeance duology is like not super heavy on world building, because it was like the character is the story, and I didn't want to take away from that by spending time describing a world that doesn't really matter because it's about her. In this one, the world is a huge part of the story, the character's story, and where she comes from and like how it develops. So I think like in this sense, it will be very different for people in how I go about like exploring that. But yeah, so it'll be much more horror based, much more like world building and magic compared to anything else I've done before.
Is there anything in the world building that you've just had the most fun with so far?
Yeah, so I'm creating like an entire, I don't want to call it a race of people because it's like a group of people that exist in the same like realm as them, but they're magical. So they're like a magical species. And I've been having a lot of fun like designing the characters around that because like I said, it's very much like a mashup of kind of like I want to say kind of like floral and folk horror. So like a lot of like floral visuals, a lot of like creepy like creatures and stuff, and like pairing that with like the elegance of ice magic has been really fun for me to kind of like create this like vision of what the magic's going to look like and what that group of characters will look like. So that's been my favorite thing to explore so far.
That's cool. Now, you said you create a Spotify playlist when you kind of start. What songs would be on your playlist for this new book?
Yeah, so it's so far it's gonna sound really funny, but I don't know if anyone else listens to these, but I love atmospheric playlists that are like based on like a setting. So I have like, for example, this one has like a woods playlist that's kind of like the origin of it and like creepy vocals. So like haunting vocals has been a huge like playlist that I pulled from, but I also have artists like Aura. I don't know if you know who that is, but like their songs are very like atmospheric and like I don't know how to explain it, kind of like angelic vocals, I guess. So I like that kind of thing has been really influential. I wouldn't say that I have a lot of like, most of my playlists are very heavy on like music that I usually listen to. Like the Vengeance Becomes Her one, for example, is like mostly like all my favorite like badass women songs, you know. But this one's like I said, it's very like atmospheric. So a lot of the music is like evoking that emotion. I think it will about like as I get to know the characters more, because I'm a pantser, which means like I have no plan when I go into this. It's all just vibes. So I don't really know my characters that well yet. So like once I get to know them more, I will usually like create a character playlist like with songs that remind me of their personality. So I haven't gotten to that point yet.
What would you say right now is your top reads list for 2023?
Hi, everybody. It's Kristen with VallRell Events, inviting you to our August book club. We're going to be reading Rebecca Ross's Divine Rivals. Make sure you put it on your calendars, 7 p.m. PST on August 31st. We'll be having a Zoom meeting to talk about the book. We'll see you there.
Called The Devil I Know. It's the second book in a series. The first one is Deal with the Devil. It is like an academy, demons, deals kind of vibe, and it's very queer. That is definitely one of my top reads of the year so far. I would also say, I'm trying to think, I've read so many good books. There is a like novella series that's called Ravage and Rapture, and those books are very good. They're I would say it's more like horror romance almost. Okay. But yeah, there's I would definitely, if anyone's listening and they're thinking about picking it up, definitely check the trigger warnings. It is very dark and like a little bit disturbing. But those have been my two favorite recent reads this year. I have such a hard time remembering what I've read last year and this year. I also have read, there is like this cozy horror series that I love. That's like a slow burn romance. The second one came out this year and I just read that. It's called Strange Blood. And the first one is called Odd Blood. It's very much like What We Do in the Shadows vibes.
Okay.
Those are probably
a great show.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love it. It's so good. But yeah, so those are probably my top like 3 that I've read so far.
That's awesome. Now, is there a genre that maybe you haven't dabbled in yet that you're really excited to, or that you kind of like want to jump into, but you're kind of timid because it's not something you really know that well?
Yeah, so I have a second pen name that I'm writing under to do that.
You.
Yeah, but I for this pen name, so for that one I'm exploring like writing a paranormal dark romance, which I don't read much paranormal. I just love paranormal things. So that's kind of out of my comfort zone and like exploring how to do that. But for this pen name, I think eventually I will write a contemporary, even though it's hard for me to wrap my mind around ever doing that because I just haven't. But I think I have some ideas and I think my readers would love that. So I'm gonna try and maybe not this year, but maybe next year, write like a short contemporary.
That's amazing. Now, when was the first time you started writing? I know you said you've wanted to be a writer since you were a kid.
Yeah. So like officially, like when I was like, okay, I'm gonna do the author thing and like I'm ready to do it. That was like 2020, I think like February or so. I joined a writing group on TikTok, and it just like that helped me like just get it done. It just took off from there, because I've written a couple different, like started a couple different books throughout my life, like in my early 20s and stuff. But when I really sat down to write, it was when we were in lockdown.
What inspired you to take that plunge? I know you said book talk, but was there anything else that kind of like pushed you to want to finally just sit down and write that novel?
I think it was just like where I was in my personal journey. Like, I've always said like Vengeance Becomes Her was like my heart book, and it was very much like based on events that happened to me. So I think like as I was healing from that, and I had started journaling actually, and I wrote this journal entry, and that was like the start of this book. It was like I don't know. I think you read it. Like the prologue is a letter, and that was really like born of this journal entry I made, and that was the first thing I wrote for the book. So yeah.
I am a huge fan of reading books that I think are healing books, is what I call them. The ones that like usually like you start off because it's a part of you to get something out, or
Yeah.
you have an aha moment while you're writing it that kind of like just takes you out and you're like, damn.
Yeah.
So putting that with reading, which I highly recommend everyone to pick up the books, is so amazing, because at times like I feel like the book was written to connect with anyone that kind of experiences that trauma of feeling like that part of them has been lost or taken or going through that. Did you find it at times hard to try and put so much of yourself into that book?
Yeah, I think it was very challenging, honestly. Like a lot of times it was just like I didn't even know if I could finish the series. Just because it took a lot of mental like gymnastics to be able to like put that much of myself on the page. And it was also just very scary to put that out there. And I did make some changes in the original story because it was too personal. Like I had to make it more universal. But I think it works better that way, because it really wasn't about me. I wanted to write a book that people could connect with and like feel like what I had gained from writing the story, but via reading it, which is like healing and accepting like this reclaiming of your own kind of like trauma and healing and becoming a stronger version of yourself, but like not allowing that to make you forget about what you've gone through, kind of thing. So for me, it was very hard to write, but at the end of the day, it was also like a very necessary step in my healing journey, and I don't regret it. But I definitely had to tweak the story to be able to tell it with actually like, without feeling like I was giving too much away of myself.
Now, we know how hard it is to put yourself into whatever you are crafting, but it's also really hard sometimes to, what, as we know in the writing business, is kill your darlings.
Yeah.
Was there anything in any of your projects that you basically had to take an X to that you were just like, I'm so sorry?
Yeah, so in the original version of the Vengeance manuscript, I had like a whole I had the part where she meets like the man that she falls in love with who betrays her. I had that whole part of the story written in, and I loved being able to show like how they met and like their like how she was like magnetized him and stuff. And because I thought that was a very valid part of my experience and like would really like create this depth to it. But I ended up cutting it because I was like, this is way too much information. And I was also like, because you know how you need to be like to the inciting incident very quickly as a writer. It was just too much before that to like really hook people, I felt. So I cut that. But I always think about like maybe I'll release it to my newsletter people at some point, if I can find it, because I'm terrible at keeping track of like my oldest drafts, because I wasn't writing in any kind of organized way when I first started this. So yeah, I had to take that whole part out, which was kind of sad, but I think it really paid off in connecting the reader with the story quicker.
Now, how long did it take you to write Vengeance Becomes Her?
I believe it was a year and a half total. I started writing it in February and I ended the next, like, let's say May. So, but from beginning to publish, I didn't finish for like a year and a half. So it's interesting because with the publishing process, as I'm sure you know, like the writing is only part of it. Then you have like all the kind of like admin work that takes like a month and a half to do. Well, depending on how you do it. But for me, I'm like I'm a slow publisher compared to most people.
I think something that I really appreciate from you as an author is how open you are on TikTok specifically about the whole process. Even right now, you have a current series going on where you're kind of focusing on what is kind of like the come down period after you do all the publication, after you sink your soul and heart into a project. For people who are struggling to kind of find out what's next, what advice would you have for them?
I would say definitely find your community and reach out to them when you need them. Like, don't silo yourself just because, like, even if you're only feeling like imposter syndrome, or if you were just like feeling that letdown after publication where you're like, okay, all the excitement's gone and now I feel like I'm in kind of like a dead zone of what I'm going to do next. Like, having a community or even just one or two people that you can reach out to will literally change everything. Like, I think I would not be able to keep doing this and have like the motivation to keep going through this like very draining process if I didn't have people to be like, I need to vent really quick, or hey, can I get your opinion on this, or like, I just need to chat about author things. Like, it honestly like is the thing that keeps me going.
What has been your favorite thing regarding building your community?
Honestly, I think I've been super lucky. I've found so many people who like share like the things that I love that they have in common. And I found some people who are very passionate about like not only plus size representation, but like fat liberation, which has been so like validating and so like empowering to have that community. And even my community members who aren't fat people, they're so supportive of that, and they are open to learning and advocating and sharing that information, that it has just been like so incredible. Like, it might not sound like it's very much tied to writing, but since all of my entire platform is about that, it really does tie into my storytelling and the support that I get with my books. So that has been like such an important part of me building a community online, and especially as an author.
Well, Alexis, it has been such an honor to sit down with you and talk about all of these amazing subjects. Not only that, but to also be part of your community and see all of you make your TikToks and everything like that. And I just want to thank you again so much for taking your time. And I cannot wait to see your next project and all the future projects that are coming out. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I had such a great time.
Yes. And thanks to you guys for tuning in to another episode of Spill the Ink. I'm your host, Kimmi Ann, and this has been a VallRell Productions. Make sure to check out the information below to find Alexis Maness and all of her books and social media, as well as our own social media on TikTok and Instagram. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe, because we will be putting out new videos every Wednesday. Until then, you guys, keep slinging, ink slingers.